Awesome.
A lot easier posting these things onto Twitter from my computer than it is from my phone in the middle of the
That's a,
meetup.
that's a big learning from last time. Come armed with a laptop in some
Yeah,
form.
definitely messed up that one.
Yeah. All
We're
right, we're
live.
live. We're good to go.
We're live. Alrighty.
Hello, Internet.
Good.
Hello world.
I'm gonna pin it to you, Nath.
Send it to me.
Yeah.
Okay. I think I'm just gonna do the intro. We can.
Oh,
Yeah, pin it to me because I'm going to do the intro. I'll screen share though when I'm doing the intro anyway. So I think that'll take over because I'll be screen sharing.
there we go. You're good. All on you, Tom.
Oh, all on me. Can't deal with the attention. Do we have what's the go on YouTube? Can we see how many people we have? I'm assuming it's single digits.
So we got two watching now.
Oh, hello both of you.
Let me get a retweet on, hey?
Oh, here we go. That's why we got you on, mate. Popularity boost.
That's right, popularity contest.
Ben Hood says, "Hey guys, hey Ben, thanks for joining in."
G'day, Ben. Well, should I kick off the intro or just?
Kick off. Maybe
I think
just bring up the pizza link so people can start entering the raffle. Would be good.
Works for me.
And then we'll just have to keep mentioning it throughout your talk and probably my talk. And mate, do you want to do the draw after my talk?
Yeah, may as well. Gives everyone time to respond.
Yeah, as people tune in and out and stuff.
I'm assuming you can see my screen.
Yep.
Wonderful. Well, we'll kick it off. Hello, everyone. Oh, my video has been spotlighted according to Zoom now. Kicking off for Q3 2021. Thanks for joining us again. We've got a few people from actually a few different places around Australia this time, which is fun. And I think there's, based on comments in PHP Australia, some people from all parts of the world again as well. So what we do every time we've been doing, particularly these remote meetups, is we've been doing raffles for pizza vouchers via Prezi. And it's only something we can do because we've got great sponsors in Credit Sense, Nido, which is now Maripost, isn't it? Should probably have updated that. Oops, my bad. We'll do it for Q4, don't worry.
Do it for Q4, that's not, yeah.
Can't promise that, but I'll try. Info Exchange and Procure Pro as well. So if you go to brisphp.com/pizza, you can enter a Google form to enter in a raffle, and we will be raffling off those entrants later.
You can actually also add JetBrains to that list as well because we have a JetBrains license to give away as well.
Yes, we have a JetBrains license to give away. Thank you, Nathan. Follow us on all our socials, mainly Twitter. That's where we have all of our activity, which is about one post a quarter, and dozens or dozen of followers. We also use the BrisPHP GitHub. There's a repo for the meetup itself, where you can use issues to track essentially meeting or talk requests. So if you want to hear something, you can post, hey, I want to hear this. Or if you've got something you want to talk about, you can post that even as well. And that's just how we sort of track who's raised interest and also what people are interested in as well. I think, Nathan, you went through after the last meetup where we had a bit of a survey asking for what people wanted to hear from at BrisPHP.
Yeah.
And you went and created some GitHub issues as a response as well. So if you go through, have a look at those issues, you can see if there's any talks that something you might be able to talk about, something you've got experience in, a bit of a war story and all that sort of stuff. Go and jump on and say hello. So tonight, as usual, we have Nathan doing the quarterly roundup of what's new in PHP land. So trolling Twitter, trolling Reddit, just to go through everything that's been happening, latest releases, all that sort of stuff. And then we've got Building an Application to Scale on Vapor by Michael Dyrynda, which should be very fun because it's always good to hear talks of actually battle-tested scaling stories. I'm looking forward to that quite a lot. And because we all need security, we've got Securing PHP with Stephen Cooper, which we all know there's some pretty speckled past and history with keeping PHP secure, so I'm sure there's lots to learn out there as well. So to remind, BrisPHP.com/pizza, you can jump on and you can enter the Google form, put your name in for the hat, and we'll kick off with Nathan now, but then after he's done, we'll go and read out all the names and give out some vouchers.
All right. Thanks for the intro, Tom. That means I have to share my screen now. Hang on a second while I find the button. All right. So, welcome everyone. This is as Tom said, the roundup for what's new in PHP in the last quarter. Mostly it's almost entirely about PHP 8.1, which, as you can see from the schedule, is being released in November, which is very exciting. So it should be probably around the time of our next meetup. So they've done a feature freeze for PHP 8.1 as of last month. So no new features are added, and now they're just kind of battle testing it. As of tomorrow or the next day, they're starting to do release candidates and more sort of battle testing. So that's pretty exciting. I won't go over all the new features in PHP 8.1 because we've done that in previous meetups. Probably in the next, before PHP 8.1 is released, in the next meetup, I'll go over like kind of the best features, very subjectively, because it's the ones I think are best. And so I want to talk about them, but that can come next time. But since the last meetup, new features have been added. They've added a few really cool ones. One is they're making callables like a first class language pattern. So you've probably done a bunch of stuff like this, like from callable thing, or you can use just like an array. Like that is essentially a callable in PHP. It's kind of really gnarly because you can't really do static analysis on that, or IDE can't really help you on that. And it's not very type safe as well. So, and also there's like problems with scoping and all sorts of stuff with this sort of like array method as well. But now we'll soon have this new syntax with these 3 dots, which is very confusing because it looks like, you know, when you read like a blog post and someone puts like 3 dots to say like, I've just cut out this code, don't worry about it. This is actually going to be real code where you can assign this to a variable now, and now it's a callable. And the cool thing about this callable is you get type safety. It's easily statically analyzed, and something else. Oh, the scope of the callable is from where it's defined, not from where it's called. So you'll see here's a example here. If I've got a private method down here and I return a callable up here, like this old way of doing a callable, nothing outside of here, this won't actually work because at the time it's calling it, it checks the scope and you don't have permission, you don't have scope to access a private method. This way works if you do this like weird closure from callable syntax, which I actually hadn't read until yesterday when I wrote my slides. I'd never seen that before. Actually, post a comment on YouTube if you have seen that before, because I'm curious if anyone's actually used that and why they would use that.
Look at you go, searching for that engagement.
I know, right? Please also post comments on YouTube throughout the talk because there's a little bit of a delay. So if you wait for the question slide at the end, then like we might miss your question. But this new way works the same as this, except it's just like less ugly. So I'm looking forward to that. And it's a similar syntax to like array unpacking and also the forget what it's called, like the splat operator that you can have in your parameters up here as well. So it's like reusing syntax that you're already kind of familiar with, and makes it like kind of future proof with other with other new features as well. Another thing we're getting is intersection types. You'll notice the word pure here, which is there for a reason, which I'll get to in the next slide. But similar to union types, which we got in PHP 8, an intersection type is kind of like a union type, but opposite. If this was a pipe symbol, a union type would mean that this variable can be either traversable or countable. And it can also be both as well. But intersection means it has to be both. Previously, if you wanted something that had to be both an iterator and a countable, or whatever it is you want it to be, you had to make this new interface that extends both of them, and then you could type it. There's problems with that because then you can't type it against either of these, and it's a bit of a hacky way around it and doesn't really work in all cases. But this way allows you to work in most cases with a few caveats because of the word pure up the top here. And the caveats are it only works on class and interface names. So you can't use like scalar values in there. And that's because like you can't type something as both an int and a string because that just doesn't really make any sense. Duplicates are kind of disallowed. So you can't say, in this example, you wouldn't be able to say traversable and traversable. That would throw a compile error. However, if you had this interface defined, you could say traversable and countable iterator, because at compile time, like they didn't want to put in the effort to like dig down through like the inheritance hierarchy of this to figure out if it's like duplicates or not. So it'll just kind of work. It'll just allow you to do that. And that's kind of what this bit here is, like redundant types. So you can have redundant types if you have like an inheritance hierarchy and you say A and B, but A extends B. Another caveat is you cannot mix it with union types. And you also can't have null types as well. And this is mostly because the syntax around these two is kind of tricky. Like if you have a union type, whereabouts, like essentially what's the order of operations on your thing here? Like if you have a or null on the end of this, is it traversable and countable or null? Like do your brackets go around here, or do they go around like countable and null or traversable? Like it's kind of weird, and technically mathematically the order of operations works out, but you can't really expect everyone to like know each individual order of operations off the top of their head. It's not super readable. So I think in order to try and get this RFC through and implemented, they just kind of like excluded a bunch of things so that there was less debate about all this sort of stuff, which is the stuff that people would debate about and would cause RFCs to not get merged. Another super cool feature that I've been waiting for a long time is read-only properties, which gives you the ability to have like actual immutable things in PHP. Previously, you could kind of get immutability this way by having like a private property and then a getter and not having a setter, but your name is still mutable from inside the user. So you can still accidentally change it in a bunch of ways. Whereas read-only means that you can only set the property once, and that can be set through a constructor, it can be set through a setter. Like you don't have to initialize it in the constructor as well. So once you combine this read-only syntax with the promoted properties that came in PHP 8, then you can get like pretty simple like data classes, which is this. And this is the sort of stuff that if you do like TypeScript and that sort of thing, you see this all the time in TypeScript, and it's really excellent. Whereas in PHP, we used to have this, plus you'd have to declare this up there, and you have to have a doc block on it as well before typed properties came out in 7.4. So with all these new features, we're getting just nicer and clearer syntax, which is good. Similarly, read-only properties does have quite a few caveats to it. You can only write to it once, which is, I guess, the whole point of read-only, so it's barely a caveat that's kind of as intended. But it must be initialized in the scope that it's declared. So you can't, like if you declare a public property in your in your user class, you can't then initialize that from outside the user class. Even though it's a public property, it still has to be initialized from inside your user class. The property must also be typed. So you can't have like a non-typed read-only property. That's because non-typed variables in PHP actually default to null. Like if you have a property that's not typed, it's actually null in the engine. So it's like already initialized. But a typed property has like a special state of uninitialized. And that's how they can determine if it's been written to or not. But however, with PHP 8, that introduced the mixed scalar type. So you can actually have an untyped property. If you type it as mixed, then you can have read-only mixed properties that can be like not typed really. You're also not allowed to have default values. So you can't say like, actually you can have a default value in here because that's in your constructor. So that's really just a default value for a parameter. But if you declared it up here as like public read-only name equals foo or whatever, that is really just a constant at that point. You've got a read-only property, setting it to a default value, it can't be changed, it's just a constant. So you're not allowed to do that. They just say use constants instead. You're not allowed to call the unset method on a read-only property. It throws a fatal error. And then a little one that might catch you out is that even if you pass in a read-only object into here, you can still mutate that object. So you can't change the object. You can't reassign it to something else because the property is read-only, but you can mutate that object that you've passed in because it's not like this read-only property does not like, I don't know the word, pass down through everything that you're passing in, right? One thing I just thought of now, which I'm unsure of, is how that works for arrays. I assume that means you can like still pull and push onto arrays and stuff, but you won't be able to change the actual array, but I could be wrong there. If you have more information than me, please post a comment. Another thing that we're getting is new in initializers. So where you're having like a default value in your parameter list, you can now initialize it to call the new constructor thing here and pass in like a new object. As previously, you'd have to do something more like this, default it to null, and then you can set it in this sort of way. But now you can actually instantiate a new class at this point. You can like pass in properties here. You can like you can like new up a bunch of stuff as well. Do whatever you need to do. There are some caveats, like you can't forget all the caveats. Did I put it in the next slide? There's a couple of little caveats that you're probably not going to hit. You can't have new default values as like a class property though, just because of the order that things get executed in. It's really technical, but you can have it here, but you can't have like a private variable declared up here that defaults to a new logger. But another cool thing that fell out of adding this implementation is you get nested annotations now, sorry, attributes. This ability of like being able to put new attributes in here was specifically left out of scope of the original attribute RFC because it was like too hard and too controversial. People were debating it too much. They just left it out. But now just like falling out of this RFC, you just kind of get this as a bonus, which is cool. They've increased performance as well by adding a new inheritance cache. So it works with the op cache. So previously your inheritance map, like if you've got A extends B, that link between A and B was not cached in the op cache. The class still gets compiled and cached in the op cache, but then at runtime, you still had to like go and check, A extends B, go and grab me all the methods and properties off A and make them accessible from B. All that stuff was still done at runtime. But now that all gets linked and done and cached in op cache as well. And some preliminary testing shows that you probably get like about an 8% performance improvement over that, which is pretty exciting. We also can get final constants now. So like we have a class here that's not final, but we have a constant that is final, which means you can't override it in a child class. The same as public methods, really. You get a fatal error. I don't have another slide about it, but there's some pretty funny bits with this is that a constant in an interface was already final. Like, I don't know if anyone's actually run into that before, but you define an interface that has constants in it. And if you have a class that implements that interface, they can't overwrite that constant. Whereas at the moment, if you defined these classes, obviously without the final keyword, this is completely legit. You can like override a constant in a child class and it's fine. Fun fact with the whole interface thing is if foo implements an interface and tries to override the constant, that's a fatal error. However, if foo doesn't override the constant, but then bar extends foo, then it can override the constant because of reasons. Because PHP mainly. That was a bit of a weird caveat previously. However, that all gets fixed essentially with this new final class constant. Like interfaces and classes all work the same essentially. So an interface that defines a constant, that constant is no longer final by default. You have to specify final in your interface if you want it to like essentially have the same functionality as before. Couple of little things mainly around React PHP. It turned 9 a few days ago. And to celebrate turning 9, they released a new feature, which is like a update of their main event loop, which makes essentially just like using React PHP from the start like a lot easier. You need less boilerplate.
When you say turn 9, is that 9 years old? Or like
Yes.
version 9?
No, 9 years old.
Really?
Yeah, they've been around for a while. Hey, that surprised me as well. Yeah. Crazy. And then another exciting thing was, I don't know if anyone remembers from the last meetup, but I talked about the new PHP feature called Fibers, which is essentially like a really, really low level language feature, which allows you to do kind of asynchronous stuff a little bit better. So like if you're reading from a file or downloading a file, you can essentially use a kind of like a promise where you can like let that kind of run while you're waiting on IO, you can run other code, and it's not actually asynchronous. It's not actually parallelizing PHP or anything like that. But it allows you to kind of manage that a little bit better. And because it's super low level, it's not code that you actually really want to write or handle yourself, but it's something that frameworks like React PHP and AMP can use to essentially provide like a better library and better API to their users. So React PHP and AMP have actually decided to join forces and create like a nice asynchronous abstraction that they can both use and both utilize to make asynchronous stuff better in PHP moving forward. So that's pretty exciting. There's also the JetBrains developer survey. I had a look at some of the cool stats for PHP, and I thought it was really fun. So I thought I'd share. Something I wasn't aware of was how popular PHP was in France. I don't know why.
Symfony.
Symfony, probably.
It's the national web framework.
It's teach it at school, part of their French education. Yeah, so that was pretty cool, but it gets cooler. We wait and see. PHP 7.4 being the most used language by like a long shot, which is pretty cool. And then these next ones is kind of like, I like to compare myself to like the majority of other people and see like, am I using like the main technologies people are using? And this surprised me a lot, is that most people actually develop locally. I've had so many issues developing locally in the past. But people are moving like quite fast to Docker by the things as well. I don't know how these numbers add up though. I only just noticed that, but that's much more than 100%. Anyway, moving on. Maybe you could select multiple. A lot of people debug code with bar dump and DD and die and that sort of thing. But the thing that I'm curious about here is, what is this 3% of other? Does anyone know?
That's just shipping it to production and just waiting for it to come back by Zendesk.
Yeah. Just don't debug. Wait for your users to tell you when things are broken. Yeah, I'm curious. Like, what is that 3%? If anyone is part of that 3%, please let me know. And then framework popularity. Like, I didn't realize how far ahead Laravel was of like literally everything else, but it's crazy. Even on like the full stats of like all frameworks, like Laravel, well, it's not like at the top, it's a fair way up across all languages, which is pretty cool. Testing has become a lot more prevalent recently in PHP, which is great news. Still a lot of people down here that don't write tests, but
I write tests but don't use any frameworks. Why make it that hard for yourself?
yeah, I don't know. Maybe they made their own framework. Maybe they
Each their own, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I remember trying to teach like non-programmers PHP and like getting them to like install PHP unit to write a test, and it's just like it's a whole thing. So then I ended up just like write like a PHP script that calls your code, and then you run it and just like visually check the output, and that's your test. And then they got it, but like they didn't understand PHP unit and composer and all the things that you need to get PHP unit running. So quality tools, I personally use pretty much all of these, especially all these ones at the top down to here. And then it's cool to see that they're all picking up as well, because the PHP community used to be quite against these sort of tools as well. And I mean, I guess they still are a little bit, but personally, from my experience, these help you like quite a lot. Just makes your whole life a lot easier. So would recommend. And unsurprisingly, the most thing that is developed with PHP is websites. Although it is cool to see like all these other things popping up that people are using PHP for. And with the new features coming in PHP, like the just-in-time, whatever it's called, compiler, and all the other things that they've done recently to improve performance and that sort of thing, means that all these should be coming up in coming years, as well as people are able to use PHP for more things. But that's all I've got for you today. I don't know if there's been any comments on YouTube.
It's mostly just banter about not testing and just shipping it to pod.
Keeping it simple. I think there's a consistent theme there.
Yeah, it's one way to put it.
Don't have to worry about tests. It's much more simple that way. Sure. All right. That's cool. Well, if you have any more questions, like feel free to post them throughout the coming talks, and I can always jump back on and answer them.
So I guess we'll just jump in and do the pizza vouchers, which, good news to everyone that entered. You all won. We are one away from, like, there's one left. So, well, two left actually. So next two people, whoever submit on BrisPHP.com/pizza, I'm going to get vouchers. It's just the rules. I don't make them, but it's how it works. So, we got vouchers coming for Max, Wouter, Ben, Ali, Roman, Josh, Michael, and Sam. So, congratulations. They are good odds this week. But otherwise, Michael, if you're ready to get started, then let's scale some Laravel.
Let's scale away. So I am. Can you see my screen? That is the question that every speaker ever has to ask.
It's the ritual of starting a Zoom call, I think.
Looks
Yes,
great.
we can.
The colors are awesome and match your background. Brilliant.
Pop, I know. That was totally by accident. This is just one of the Keynote's default themes. All right. Well, thanks, Nathan, for reaching out and having me on. I'm going to talk about building an application to scale on Laravel Vapor. This is not a sort of general talk. It's not how to use Laravel Vapor or any sort of general things. It's specific to the SaaS that I run. It's called Then Ping Me. for anyone that's in the Laravel community, you might have heard of it. It is a hands-free scheduled task monitoring service for your Laravel applications. I have spoken about it previously. The link is just thenping.me if you want to check it out at the end of this talk. But this talk is around scheduled tasks. I gave a presentation on this at the Laravel Worldwide Meetup this time last year, where we kind of talked about the implications of having overlapping scheduled tasks that can cause issues in your own applications, tasks that run late, tasks that overlap, tasks that don't run at all, how you know about that. That was kind of the crux of that presentation. So if you're interested in that, you can have a look at that. But in the context of a platform like ThenPingMe that is designed to monitor those tasks, overlapping applications can mean high but predictable influxes of traffic. So jumping right in, shout out to my mate Kaneko who put this little moving clock together. I couldn't figure it out, but he was straight away. So in a Laravel application or in any application really, whether you're using cron or the task scheduler within the context of Laravel, you can schedule a task. You can have tasks that run every 5 minutes. You can have tasks that run every 10 minutes. These things are all rolling all day long. It could be every 15 minutes. It could even be, every hour at 15 minutes past the hour, you're having tasks running. These things don't seem terribly scary in and of themselves. You could have a task that runs every hour at 15 and 20 minutes past the hour. And then, of course, you've got the old daily one where the clock just flies around forever and ever. So with Laravel's scheduler, all of these things run at the hourly, the daily, the weekly, all of those things will run at 0 minutes past midnight. But where I'm going with this, it's not until you start thinking about each of these tasks at the same time that perhaps the issue starts to reveal itself, both from an execution and monitoring standpoint. So execution within your own applications, monitoring from my side of the fence. So it's not the tasks themselves, but it's like the overlapping of the scheduled tasks. So if we look at that clock again, we bring that back, shrink it down so it all fits here. We've got a task that you've got configured to run every 5 minutes. And then we've got the task that's every 10 minutes. And then the task that's every 15 minutes. And then the hourly task at 15 minutes past the hour, and the hourly task at 15 and 20 minutes past the hour, and then the daily task. So I thought about this graphic, this animation for like a year to sort of figure out how best to explain what this issue is. If that's still not clicking, if the visual doesn't work, let's have a look at this. Let's pick out the 15 minute past the hour. Every single hour of every single day, you're going to have at 15 minutes past the hour, 4 tasks that are running at the same time. In the context of your own application, that's probably not a huge deal. You know, the 5-minute task will run, the 15-minute task will run, the hourly 15 and the hourly 15:20. They will all run one after the other in a default Laravel application. That can cause issues if one of them is slow. If one of them fails, it might trip up the rest of the scheduler, things like that. So the issue we really see is when they all kind of stack on top of each other. So if we go back here and we look at hourly, if you're monitoring this stuff, if you're looking at it, this is concurrent database connections. And touching your database at any level of scale is something that you need to be mindful of. The database is almost always going to be a bottleneck for your application long before PHP is the problem, or long before, HTTP requests, things like that. It's the overhead of connecting to, talking to, and getting a response back from your database. So this is a period of time in July. So towards the end of last month, yep, we're still in August. Towards the end of last month, we sort of started to see some issues creeping up in our application. And if you look at this week where we really started to notice it, you don't see it at this level. But if we zoom into a specific day, before we did any optimization, you can really see, and you probably can't actually, I tell a lie, you probably can't see the times, but these spikes are every hour. So every hour we're getting basically any task or any number of projects with any number of tasks that are running on those overlapping schedules all coming in at once. So the 5-minute, the 10-minute, the 15-minute, the hourly, all of those tasks are all suddenly smashing us all at the same time. And whilst practically on Laravel Vapor, you have infinite scale. It really only applies to your lambdas, your connectivity at the HTTP layer, because as I said, your database really has finite scale. The database resources, even in a Vapor or on an AWS Lambda application itself, are ultimately constrained in a number of different dimensions. So most basically, you have CPU and memory. In our context, we don't touch that at all. Our CPU basically sits constantly at 5%. Our memory doesn't hover around. It's basically constant any time of day. It doesn't matter what we're doing. So we're pretty fortunate in that regard. But where we first started to see issues was with the concurrent connections. And these are limited based on the memory available to your RDS instance. So I don't know how Amazon arrives at this number. I didn't look into it. It's basically the memory available to your instance. So on the base RDS MySQL instance, I think it's 1 gig. So you get that into bytes. You divide it by that number, which is 12,582,000, and you arrive at a number somewhere around 80 from memory. So we would tickle that, as we started to do that, and as we started to onboard more customers, and we started to see more projects and more tasks picking in, especially on those hourly intervals, we started to hit those connection limits. The other thing that you're commonly able to, or commonly going to bump on, is input-output operations per second, or IOPS. So these are constrained by the storage that's available on your RDS instance. So the minimum number you're going to get is 100 requests a second, or 100 IOPS per second, when you have 10 gig of storage provisioned. And you have a burst balance that is available if you go over this periodically. So if you've got an instance that's sitting there, or an application that's sitting there and that hits this database really hard daily to do a report, it'll tank through that burst balance for you. And then over the course of the day, that value will go back up. And so the next time it runs, it won't happen. We have a fairly consistent influx of traffic. So this thing is constantly going down. And once it gets to zero, and where our traffic doesn't change, that becomes problematic, because blowing through that burst balance and not maintaining and managing your available IOPS will impact the RDS instance's performance. I won't go into it any more than that, mostly because it goes over the top of my head and I don't understand it, but there is a link there at the bottom of the slide that goes into an article that talks about it a bit more on the AWS developer blog, I think it is. There is a caveat to this, and that's if you're using Aurora MySQL as opposed to the RDS MySQL. You need to worry less about the IOPS, but there is a cost and parity consideration that we need to be aware of. And so in terms of feature parity, Aurora MySQL is MySQL 5.7 compatible. So if, like us, you require or are already using MySQL features, that's something that you can't really use. But whilst the RDS MySQL is fully managed, Aurora's MySQL is built to scale automatically and provides much greater availability and data durability from the get-go. With RDS, you need to configure multi-availabilities on replication. You need to have all these other considerations, and you need to sort of scale up those instances as and when needed. And Aurora MySQL will also reduce any I/O bottlenecks by essentially decoupling the compute and storage operations. And the other consideration that you have to kind of think about is for a base RDS instance, it's about $15 a month. Whereas for a base Aurora instance, you're looking at about $40 US a month. So that's the thing that you need to be, the main things that sort of we needed to consider between the two. So looking at your application, you want to identify areas, and this is the process we went through. You want to identify areas that you can improve upon. So for us, we needed to look at our main interaction point, which is that ping endpoint, where all of the applications that we monitor send a JSON payload every time a scheduled task either starts running, finishes running, skips running, or fails running. So if we go back to the hourly thing, we can identify that if we are monitoring 10 different projects that each have one task running hourly, that we can expect one HTTP request for each of those apps at the top of the hour. So they're all going to ping 10 times. Sorry, each of those 10 applications will ping once for the start and once for the finish. So let's assume that in in a simple scenario, all of these tasks pass, all of them run within about a second of each other. So that's, 20 HTTP requests that all come in all at once. Now, if you think about that in the context of, this is just hourly, but if you then add the 5-minute tasks and the 10-minute tasks and the 15-minute tasks and the daily task or the hourly tasks with all of that, and then you multiply that by a number of different tasks and a number of different projects, this like gets up very quickly, which we found out fairly early on. But once you have identified the areas to improve on, you keep an eye over them, or you keep an eye on them, over a period of time. Some metrics are more obvious than others. But on any given day, I'll typically look at the preceding 12 hours. So when I get up in the morning, I'll have a look, what happened overnight and see if anything stands out. And then I'll check periodically across the day. So I'll have a look before I start work, I'll have a look at lunchtime, I'll have a look at the end of the day. And that's where we come back to this. We can see that over a period of time. So this graph, you won't be able to see the scale, I don't think, at the bottom, but it's about 11 hours that, yes, we can expect a number of projects to ping concurrently, and we can see how that impacts us at the top of every hour when all of those tasks collide, and we're connecting to the database 25 times all at once. And once we have observed our metrics over that period of time, and this is going to vary based on exactly what's happening. So for us, it was concurrent connections. It could be IOPS. In fact, it was IOPS for us, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. But understanding them helps you understand what you need to do next. So it may be that you need to scale up your RDS instance to get more CPU or memory. It might be that you need to increase the provision storage, which makes more IOPS available. But with that understanding, we know that at midnight every single day, we can expect the project alone to send us 4 HTTP requests for each task starting and each task finishing. And as I said, that will then compound as we have more tasks, as we have more projects, and it all just adds up, and that starts to impact. So now that we've identified and observed and understood what the constraints of our application are, we can act on this knowledge. And for then PingMe, that essentially led us to just caching. And if there's one key takeaway from running this high traffic app in particular, it's that caching is really, really important. DynamoDB is yet another Amazon web service that is built specifically for single-digit millisecond response time. So it's really meant to be read from and written to at high velocity. Let's say velocity. So anything you need to frequently read that changes infrequently ought to be cached, and we'll touch the database only when we absolutely have to. So as I said, when I say high traffic application, in our instance, it's not the sustained volume or unpredictable virality or anything like that. It's not Fathom Analytics as an example. If they are hosting a client and that site becomes viral, ends up on Hacker News or whatever, and suddenly they've got tens of thousands of people hitting that. We don't have that. We have a fairly controlled, slow and predictable. We know what task we're monitoring for any given application, so we know when we can expect volume traffic, and we can sort of scale up our operations based on that. But because we're monitoring the scheduled tasks, we can, as I said, fairly accurately anticipate when we'll see an influx of traffic. There is some variability there. We can account for all of these different things except for the when between, the unless, the unbetween. So these are in the context of Laravel's task scheduler truth constraints. So you might have schedule command daily and then when, and you might put some constraint in there that's like, I don't know, when it's my birthday daily or whatever, where between the hours. I want it to run every day hourly, or I want to run hourly, but only between the hours of 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. Unless is the inverse of that. So days, weekdays, and weekends are just simplifications for, so you don't have to do a scheduled a cron entry that's like, *0, 1, 2, 3, 4 for weekdays and things like that. So overall, because we do have a single point of entry for the majority of our application traffic, it was simple to pinpoint the areas for an improvement. And that boiled down essentially to 3 checks at that entry point. Does the project being pinged exist? So do we know? So we don't accept traffic from people just randomly pumping data at us. Does the project have an active subscription? It's a paid service. Once you get on the other side of your trial. So we need to make sure that you're financial, so that we can obviously keep running the service. And does the task ping belong to the project? So the Horizon snapshot command in Laravel, for example, Horizon is a queue monitoring solution for Laravel. That SHA, or the mutex that is used to identify that, doesn't change between your app and my app and Nathan's app and whoever else's app. It's always the same. So we need to make sure that the task that's coming in matches the actual application that we're looking at. And we've done some work around mapping those out, so it's a little bit more clear than what the default Laravel stuff is, because Laravel typically are only concerned with your own apps and making sure that your own tasks don't collide, whereas we need to make sure that everyone's don't collide. So none of these three things, projects, subscriptions, and tasks, are changing often, which makes them the perfect candidate for caching. And Laravel makes it really simple to just invalidate those. Anytime someone deletes a project, we have a listener that goes, all right, let's go and bump that out of the cache. Anytime a subscription lapses or the subscription's cancelled, we can go and bump that from the cache. Anytime a task that is pinged is removed, we can bump that from the cache. And likewise, adding those things in. We only have to add them once. We can tell Laravel, put this in the cache and remember it forever. As long as it's there, we don't need to worry about it too much. And if that ever changes, we can just bounce it and go from there. So now that we've acted, we go back and we observe the changes and see if that had any tangible impact. I'm pretty sure the rest of the slides now are just going to be graphs. So you can see this is our concurrent HTTP invocations before and after adding caching. So you can see once we've cut that across live, the number of concurrent requests just drops off, by about 80 concurrent requests. So we've gone from 100 down to 20. And you can see that after the caching goes in, that's fairly consistent. So that the HTTP request is no longer waiting for a constrained database to respond. So the Lambda executions complete a lot quicker, and that reduces the need for those requests to run concurrently. This is our queue invocations. So we have Laravel Vapor gives you 3 different Lambda types. There's the HTTP, which obviously handles the HTTP requests. There's a command line one, which isn't really relevant for this. That wasn't impacted by the issues we were having. And then there's the queue, which is this one. So you can see that we still kind of, it didn't really have a meaningful impact on this particular metric. We're still hitting the queue concurrency limit that we had configured. That's a separate issue. Now that we fixed the database issue, we can actually have more concurrent queue lambdas or queue workers in essence. But that you can see the trend is that, that kind of dropped off and stays down slightly. So, we're dropping from 25 concurrents to sort of 17, 18 concurrents. Acting on this, as I said, it's a separate piece of work. We go and look at, okay, now that we fixed the database issue, we can have more queue workers. And I think we bumped that up to 38 or 39, and we very rarely hit that concurrency limit. This one is showing our API gateway latency. So before and after adding the caching, again, because we're not waiting on a constrained database, our response latency is much more consistent. It goes up as we have, more customers and things like that. So, and I think I was also playing around with memory limits, just so we could see if we could balance the cost of running those things. So you add more memory, you reduce the runtime, and you kind of, it's a ever-changing balancing act to make sure that you're not overpaying to have an over-provisioned Lambda instance. We're in invocation, I guess. Likewise, with our HTTP invocation duration, before we were waiting for the database, and this would spike up, 600-700 milliseconds, and after it's fairly consistent around 175 to 200. So again, caching is having, significant, tangible, visible when you're monitoring it impacts on the application in that way. Interestingly, the number of RDS IOPS we were performing saw very little change once we optimized location and anything. So this shows that with the changes that we made, we were able to maintain our currently provisioned RDS instance for a lot longer than had we just let things go on. We could have just reached for our wallet and scaled up to the next RDS instance, but we wanted to kind of make sure we did this in a sensible way, find out what the actual bottleneck is and solve that rather than throwing money at the problem. Read latency. I don't think you'll be able to see the numbers there, but this is a graph that goes from 0.005 milliseconds up to 0.09 milliseconds. So it's not a big figure in the grand scheme of things, but you can see the variability from before and after the caching. And more concerning for us was the queue depth for waiting operations. So because we had no connection pooling, unfortunately RDS proxy doesn't work with MySQL 8, which we're using. We have these connections, the queue depth basically, and they just sit there and they wait for the database to be able to respond. So I mentioned the CPU burst balance as well at the start. Once we put this caching in, well, that burst balance worked its way up until eventually, I don't know what the trigger was, but it went from 60% up to 100%. I mentioned just last week, and this was fixed yesterday, but our CPU burst balance started to take a tumble again, and it was slow and gradual. Fortunately for us, this was due to more customers onboarding, and us, we were sitting at the IOPS limit that we had before. So all of our metrics, all of the other metrics, invocation, latency, and duration, all of that kind of stuff, they held steady based on the caching that we had implemented. So the fix for this was just to provision some additional storage, and that increased our available IOPS, and you can see up there and there, it just kind of ticked up. So another alternative for us might be to swap to Aurora MySQL. The cost benefit equation isn't quite there for us just yet. So increasing the storage is quite cheap in terms of, performance impact. Down the road, we might make the switch once that cost benefit equation changes in our favor. So, so this is essentially where we're at now. As I said, this was yesterday that we fixed up that burst balance issue. We're monitoring all of this stuff proactively and regularly, so we can see all these things. So we have a highly responsive application that can cater to its workload efficiently. It's at a reasonable cost to us as a service provider, and it gives us incredible flexibility and ability to scale. And because we're observing our metrics regularly, we can identify the issues, we can understand the performance implications, and more readily act upon them as needed. So yeah, that's me. As I said at the start, if you're interested in monitoring your scheduled tasks, I gave a presentation on this at the Laravel Worldwide Meetup last year. There's a link for that at the top. I can send out the slides or whatever. I'll send out a tweet as well with details for anyone that's interested. You can check it out at thenping.me. We've been in our launch pricing for, I don't know, a year and a bit now. So definitely check that out. If you're interested, there's a 15-day trial, I think, that you can check out if that's something that you're interested in. But if there are any questions, I've got a few minutes to be able to take some.
Excellent. Actually, is a few little questions. One of them that I had as well was, what are you using for monitoring to get those nice, pretty graphs? In a dark theme, I'll note as well. Very aesthetic.
Yeah. So we're using Grafana Cloud. I've only set this up very recently. I've tried many times over the years to set up Grafana, and I can never get it to work, even using the Docker instances that you're supposed to be able to just roll out. So Grafana Cloud is free to a certain, I think it's like 100 gig of stored data and whatever else. But the beauty of this is that it's pulling the data directly from CloudWatch. So it's you hook it into, you set up your AWS keys. It's got a CloudWatch data source in there. You set it up. You set up the graphs that you want for whatever metrics you want to display, and you go from there. So I've actually, here you go. I guess you can still see my screen. So this is essentially what we've got at the moment.
I think we see white.
You see white?
A white screen.
All right. Let me find my Zoom window, I guess. Oh, sharing is paused. Bring your shared window to the front.
Full screen probably.
Ugh.
Got confused.
Too many screens.
Too many screens. I know. All right. Cool. That's sounds good. News share. There we go. Yeah. Look at that. I don't use Zoom very much. Okay. You could probably see it now.
Yep. That's it.
Yeah. So as I said, this is Grafana Cloud, where basically we're just using the free tier at the moment because all of this data is coming directly out of CloudWatch. And so we're just visualizing the data that's in AWS already. And so it's not costing us anything, which is which is great at this point in our startup journey.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we're monitoring the HTTP, the CLI, and the Q lambdas. We're monitoring RDS. We're monitoring DynamoDB, SQS, API Gateway, and then even I said I was playing around with the memory limits that we've got for our different lambdas, so we can see, you know, we've got this much provisioned. The smallest request we saw was this, the average request was this, the maximum was this, and this is how much we're over provisioned by. So we can keep an eye on those things, and it's a constant balancing act basically in terms of cost versus speed.
Makes sense. One of the fun bits of setting up Grafana is usually once you realize that Grafana isn't actually the place that actually stores the data, and you need to get it from somewhere, and then you're dealing with a time series database, and you realize that's not MySQL, and you're a bit out of your depth.
Yeah. So Grafana Cloud gives you obviously the visualization aspect, but it also gives you Graphite. So you just pump your data. You can do it over HTTP. So you just send a JSON payload and off you go.
That's pretty convenient. One of the other questions we had was from Sam Levy. He asked, would all of these problems go away if you just used declare strict types?
You would be surprised to know, Sam Levy, that we do actually use strict types inside of Denping's code base.
Shock horror. You heard it here first. Yeah, and I guess like my sort of common question is sort of just how long do you reckon it actually took you to make some of these cation changes from like actually making code changes? Because most people usually would, as you say, reach for the wallet rather than doing this, but
it was only a few days work. We had some pretty good test coverage around those endpoints. We had to shuffle some things around, but most of it was just updating the route model binding. Just updating the route model binding to make sure that, you know, rather than hitting the database every single time, we're hitting the cache. So you cache remember forever or whatever, return the result there. And so that just goes straight into the cache. Didn't really have much impact. The only other thing that we changed was storing the JSON payloads. Sometimes they can get a bit big, and they don't, like, they're bigger than the SQS, the queuing service that AWS has in terms of like how much you can actually put in there. And so we take that JSON payload, we throw it into S3, and then we store a reference to that object back into that. And so we've only ever got the object key in the database. So, you know, just little things like that, just to be a bit smarter about how we're ingesting data and then processing it. So it was only probably 3-4 days. And a lot of the holdup was just being too nervous to make the change on a production application.
I mean, at least you got all the monitoring to see whether hasn't caught fire at least, so it's a good place. Yeah. Cool. Thanks so much for that. That was actually really awesome to see.
Excellent. If anyone has any questions, feel free to hit me up. PHP Australia Slack. I'm on Twitter at Michael Dyrynda. If you're interested, as I said, in Denping me, check that out at denping.me. But yeah, I have to run, but it's been good. I run the Adelaide meetup, the Adelaide PHP meetup, and we haven't actually had one since February last year. So it was good to be able to present again and you know, do a technical deep dive, I guess. Well, service level deep dive, but yeah.
Absolutely. Great to have you. Thanks for that.
Perfect. No worries. Thanks. Enjoy the rest of the meetup.
Thank you. And just with that, I think it is time that we start securing PHP. Developer Steve, can you help us with that?
Maybe. Might be a few dev jokes along the way. Well, I like to think of them as tech jokes now. But anyway, I should share my screen, shouldn't I? That's probably a good start. Yes.
Good place to start.
I'll do the sharing thing. Hopefully you all can see that. I'm going to minimize my Zoom a little bit. Hey, there we go. Sweet. No one said anything, so I assume you all can see it. And hello, everyone. Before we get underway, I'd like to begin by acknowledging and paying my respects to the traditional owners on the lands that which we meet today, with a heartfelt respect and acknowledgement to the Wurundjeri people, who are the traditional owners here in Narromine, where I'm presenting from today. For those that don't know where Narromine is, actually it's been in the news a little bit lately, but not for good reasons. But anyway, it's about 30 minutes from Dubbo in country New South Wales. Hello. Used to be in Melbourne, moved to Narromine. Green, lots of green around. They grow stuff locally. I'm not sure what they actually grow. Anyway, hello everyone. Thank you all for joining, and so great to be here. yeah, same thing as me. Like I miss, there used to be so many PHP like things, and like I've used it so much over the years since PHP 6. No, I'm joking. Since PHP 4, there was no 6. What? No, there was no 6. There was a release candidate. Anyway, I'm going to put my little elephant on there now. But hello, so good to be here. Hopefully you all get something from this, but please put comments into the chat, and I totally accept emojis and face palms. Speaking of, let's do a tech joke. One of these. Actually, I have two for you based on something Nathan said in the survey at the opening. But anyway, let's do the first one. Why did the vulnerability get tied? Because it ran somewhere. Now these are open source, so please share them around. It's totally important. We keep smiling, and well, especially in current times, just they're open source, so please feel free to share. Anyway, there is another one, and Nathan's survey at the start totally reminded me of it. I haven't used this one for a while. So did you hear about the testing framework called Jim? When devs run it, they hope it works out. There you go. I can feel the facepalm emojis already. But hello, for those that don't know me, my name is Developer Steve, actually legally, which is kind of still a little bit strange, but the story behind that, I'm currently, well, I'm the senior developer advocate at a company called Sneak. We do a whole bunch of security research, security scanning, all sorts of fun things. But previously, I'm also ex-PayPal Braintree, ex-Xero, ex-Telstra, and also IBM. I was, just left IBM in April. Yeah, that went quick. I've been a developer advocate for a number of years now, so it's always great going out and geeking out with folks. Actually, I was also reminded of when Nathan was talking about surveys, some of the other ththings that PHP is used for, including home automation. I actually used it one time for a demo with an Arduino Yun, which had a WRT running alongside of Arduino. It was one of the first Wi-Fi devices. So I used that. Actually used PHP to print a receipt on a little thermal paper printer back in the day. Actually, I still have the Yun around here somewhere. The Yun was terrible, but anyway, that's a whole other talk. It ran PHP fine, which is great. But yeah, I've been a developer advocate for a number of years, and it's kind of fun because I get to come out and geek out with groups from all over the place and contribute to open source things and build demos and do some talks, et cetera, et cetera. People just started calling me Developer Steve. So I thought, you know what, when I got married, that's my IoT connected wedding cake on the top right there. I printed it the night before. What could go wrong? Anyway, it didn't catch fire, so it was fine. But we combined our last names. So Kuchin is now my new name, or part of my new name. It's my new surname. But Cooper plus Houchin became Kuchin. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to make Developer Steve my middle name, or see if I could do it. Turns out you can. So anyway, my full name is Stephen Kuchin now. Well, Stephen Developer Steve Kuchin. Yeah, that's kind of my thing. Anyway, that was the background slide. This one time I wanted to mention this one too, because it still blows my mind. So Rasmus actually worked on a whole bunch of really unusual, and I've been fortunate enough to be at a number of conferences with him, but one of the side projects he once worked on was getting PHP to make music. So in 2016 at PHP Singapore, I actually did a demo on how using the extension. I think it's still around. Actually, I saw it went to a new version recently with new people who picked it up. But Rasmus worked on the initial project to output WAV files using PHP, which is cool. Like I've used it for so many unusual things other than websites over the years, which is one of the things I love. And like I've been coding for so long now. For anyone that knows it or remembers it, since the days of QBasic, it was simpler times. No libraries are open source, well, at least not much in those regards. And there's a lot now that we kind of take for granted just by doing composer install thing, and all this functionality gets brought into your project, and you can build out some amazing apps for users to, well, affect their everyday life. But even going through the world of startup, which is essentially where as a dev, where I initially started testing my skills as a dev. This is basically what I consider my dev origin story. I found that whole world amazing because you could build out e-commerce sites really quickly with the likes of PrestaShop or, I'm going to say WordPress, WooCommerce. Not a lot of dev in that though, mostly just a lot of installing. Well, there's a little bit of dev. You still got to build the theme out and stuff, but you know what I mean. And even digital agency days, like building out applications where you're building this application for end users to enter competitions and single campaign websites and stuff. It's really cool because it's such a versatile language. Thank you, PHP. And thank you, Rasmus, for kicking it all off all those many years ago. What are we, 24 years now? 25? Something like that. Anyway, someone put in the chat. I remember the 20th year was about 4 years ago. Anyway, put in the chat, we'll talk about it later. But that's the thing I love most about the PHP world, or using code to build applications like PHP, is you can build out, as devs, we can build out experiences that literally affect our users' end lives in so many different ways, end users' lives in so many ways. If you think about it, like just building out and deploying that one website, even an internal website or internal app that uses API routes to do a thing when someone pushes a button, order food, entertain, like so many ways that we affect our end users in so many different ways, just being able to facilitate that one thing that just makes that little bit of difference in their day-to-day lives. Even just helping people connect, which is really important in current times, as we know. One of the things through my dev origin story I've always been mindful of, though, is just what is lurking underneath that thing that I've just deployed. And even going back to my digital agency days, like so many times I deployed a thing, little regard for the whole security side of things. I mean, I was aware that some stuff was being deployed that I potentially may not want in there or exposed to the outside world. And then a few weeks after you deploy that app, you get that call or you get that email or you get that ticket raised where someone goes, hey, there's a whole bunch of spam running on that website, or there's a rootkit running, or here's the bill for the hosting this month. So many times I cleaned out a rootkit out of WordPress. Oh, I said it. If you think about it like an iceberg, that publicly deployed code you're putting out onto the internet or into the world is literally just the top of the surface of the iceberg in your stack. And this is where developers are starting to adopt that whole shift left mentality, as it's known in the security world, but be more aware of what you're actually deploying and what's hiding inside that iceberg. And you think about all those times that you just do, and I've got Drupal in here because I spoke at Drupal Camp a few weeks ago, about security. Yeah, it was about 3 weeks ago. Drupal Camp, Colorado, 2 a.m. That was a tricky one. It's literally like the localized version of jet lag, almost trying to stay awake. Anyway, if you think about it now, like we literally just install that thing, or install through JetBrains or through VS Code, like you're just installing that package to build out some really cool functionality really, really easily. And special mention here to, like, I've been here so many times as well, where you're trying to debug that thing, actually usually at 2 a.m. or 1 a.m., where you're trying to debug that one last thing and you find that code floating around Stack Overflow or wherever on some forum, and it looks like it solves the thing, and you just copy paste it in and let it run, and it runs, it passes the test. But again, you don't exactly know what else it's letting into your iceberg stack. And if you think about, again, back to that iceberg analogy, like your code is literally just your publicly available code or your compiled app. Your application running on infrastructure is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the holistic iceberg view. And just under the surface of that, of course, all these applications are built on some amazing open source libraries, communities, or the work of communities in the form of libraries and dependencies. In PHP, it tends to be more direct libraries than dependencies, although that does vary depending on what project you're using. But it's no surprise we've seen such an exponential growth in the number of libraries and communities, like exponentially growing year on year. If you think about it too, a lot of projects, often now a lot of libraries now, also split off some base functionality into a dependency library that then not only gets used by that particular library, but gets often adopted and used across the holistic ecosystem, which is kind of cool. Like, as somebody that's used open source and been part of open source stuff for so many years, I love that, because that is literally what open source is all about, right? And like Nathan was saying at the start, we've seen such a wide adoption, particularly with PHP across the holistic internet. So for those that haven't, we all know what Wapalizer is. But anyway, I got these stats from Wapalizer. I like Wapalizer. And basically 79% of websites across the internet are literally powered by PHP. And predominantly, yes, you're all like, yeah, that's WordPress. Well, I mean, Laravel's in there too, but they only had stats on WordPress, Drupal, and Joomla were the top three. So WordPress is 2.7 million, Drupal at 130,000, and Drupal gets used a lot in government sites as well. And Joomla, 116,000 websites. And again, Joomla gets used extensively across a lot of particularly government-based deployments. But overall, it was 4.8 million sites WAPalizers detected using some form of PHP. Of course, what we see holistically across all the different ecosystems in particular, well, we see it through PHP as well, is the growth in vulnerabilities that are being serviced in the stacks. Now, I have a brand new, like literally this is the first time I presented it, brand new demo, vulnerability demo app. So we, on the Sneak GitHub, we have a whole bunch of demo apps that we use so you can have a look at the vulnerability or the vulnerabilities that I've been talking about in the wild. So literally using the vulnerabilities in libraries that have been reported, patched, fixed. Sometimes they're still active. And I have a brand new one tonight, which hopefully will work. I do have a scene, this is fine scene that I can switch to if it doesn't. So this is fine. It should work. It will work. But yeah, we've seen an exponential growth in the vulnerabilities being detected in a lot of open source ecosystems year on year, also exponentially growing as the wider adoption. In particular, there's a thing now, a lot of governments are even looking at around supply chain attacks. So open source supply chain attacks. So this is where a lot of industries now are adopting open source use or platforms that use a lot of open source repositories, libraries, platforms. And when the vulnerabilities sort of get into that supply chain, and we've seen this in the news, it basically stops the supply chain. So you think like utilities, food delivery, well, food in general, everything from transport right through to supermarkets can literally be affected. And we have seen this as well. So a lot of governments now are putting infrastructure in place to be able to protect supply chains, even down to IoT. So federal government, the security group is part of the federal government, I forget the acronym. Anyway, they're actually looking to put in some security protocols or mandated security controls into IoT firmware now, and even the hardware side of things, just to help protect that supply chain. So as somebody that likes going to the supermarket buying food, I do appreciate this. Like I said, particularly with PHP, we see direct libraries that are becoming, or that are having vulnerabilities surface in them. Ecosystems like NPM, you tend to see, and there's a lot of examples of this, like the event stream vulnerability that surfaced a few years ago on NPM. In PHP, we see direct libraries where the vulnerabilities are surfacing, but in other ecosystems, we see an indirect vulnerability. So the actual like NPM install library is bringing in 3 to 4 other libraries with it, dependency libraries, and those are where the vulnerabilities are starting to surface. PHP is a bit of a different engine, so you see them basically surface differently through that one. Just a special mention here too, if you're not already doing it, please contribute back where you can. A lot of these open source, and they're getting tongue-tied now. A lot of these open source libraries, communities do amazing work. So please contribute back to where you can. In particular, even just testing release candidates or testing bugs, testing fixes in the wild, just to make sure you can contribute back, particularly if you're using that particular project. So I know you all do. I just like mentioning it. So we actually our security researchers actually work pretty close across a number of ecosystems, including the PHP ecosystem. We actually manage the vulnerability disclosure program for NPM, the Node.js Foundation at the moment. And there's a whole bunch of security work we do alongside that. Actually, I have a very scary story to tell at the end. We'll get to that. I was going to demo it tonight, but I didn't think I'd have enough time. But I can show you the GitHub repo. Anyway, spoilers, we'll save that for the end. But yeah, we'll save that for the end. I don't want to give away too much. Anyway, I thought I'd take a look at some of the pitfalls and things to avoid. And some of these you may already know. So some of the things to avoid in PHP, I mean, first, right off the bat, you probably already know about shell and shell exe, system and pass-through. Please don't use them. They're not good. As you can imagine, no doubt you're all familiar with what they do, but essentially they give you code level access to the operating system that you're running your PHP scripts on. So naturally, I mean, here be dragons, but I have a better one coming. These in themselves, like I've never trusted, even since the days of 4. They're kind of convenient and they're like easy to use and they solve that problem really quickly. But in particular, they literally just make your not only your iceberg stack vulnerable, but your code and ultimately your users. So please use these extremely sparingly, if at all. Just don't use them. Generally, what I'll do if I ever am tempted to use one of these type of functions, I'll step back and work out why I need to do that thing, and if I can replace it with something that's, well, a lot more safe. Anything at all. Well, not anything at all. Which brings me to my next point. Oh wait, no, the good one's coming. So 2 other things, or a suite of functions, if you will, to be also mindful of, and this sort of goes down the road of user input sanitization. And we, of course, we always sanitize user input. Totally can't stress that one enough. But you will probably know that. I'm just reiterating what you already know, if you already know it. And if not, now you know it. That was a lot of know it. Anyway, strip tags. So where possible, use things like strip tags basically only filters HTML. So JavaScript and SQL are totally valid according to it, hence why we should never use it. Using HTML entities won't completely sanitize input, or using something like HTML entities, but it does have a definable UTF character set, which is kind of getting a bit better. Again, it's not that I don't trust my end users inputting something invalid, but the way I always approached app development is, what would I do to break this? I've broken a few things in the past intentionally. Then of course I tell the companies about it. Gray hat, gray hat, always gray hat. MB underscore string to lower is basically vulnerable to an out of bounds via a UTF character set. So this is where something like HTML entities or preg replace. Oh yeah, regex. Everyone loves regex. I know it's fine. There's some good sites now that actually help you define what you want to do with regex and let you play around with a little bit. It's fine. And also be aware of, again, what you're grabbing from Stack Overflow, because I've seen some stuff floating around there before, and well, it's not good. But one of my favorites lately is filter var, which basically lets you define the filter types going in. It's actually got some really nice functionality in there, so worth checking out, particularly if you're looking to sanitize input, or depending what you're doing. Important to note to be aware of what you're using inside certain frameworks. So the talk I did at Drupal, I don't have the slide in this deck, but the talk I did at Drupal, there was some inherent PHP functionality, insecure PHP functionality, which had been brought out into the Drupal framework, that the workaround was literally to sanitize. And this is documented on the Drupal website if you wanted to take a look. But the sanitization method was to actually move it over to the user's browser and sanitize, which I would not do. So anyway, I need to do a pull request onto that document I just remembered. Anyway, which brings us to the third one, which this is scary, unserialize. This is scary for a few reasons. Please do not use serialize or unserialize. Totally use, and the documentation talks of this too, use JSON decode and encode where possible. The reason being is that serialize and, well, unserialize probably more prominently, can basically have stored functions, PHP functions stored inside the serialized input output. And yeah, that's not good. That is really not good. Again, this is another thing you see get carried into platforms like Drupal, and I'm not picking on Drupal. I love Drupal. But get carried into platforms like Drupal. So again, please do the due diligence on what you're using, even inside those frameworks, just to understand what it's doing via the underlying PHP code. Also special mention too, to make sure you're subscribing to security alerts on a lot of these different groups. Drupal has a really good security team, very proactive in identifying vulnerabilities, as does Laravel too. They're usually pretty quick in getting security alerts out and then getting things patched and put back out. Again, contribute back where you can. Anyway, I digress. Unserialized is so bad that this is some comms from the core PHP team from 4 years ago, talking about how they will no longer consider security alerts raised against unserialized as actually, it's a pretty good thread. I can post after this if anyone wants to read it. But basically, any security alerts or reports now raised against unserialized, or not even now, like from 4 years ago, they won't consider them as security issues. So I really wish they would take it out of 8. Anyway, whole other discussion. And again, this is something we see get surfaced in a number of platforms. That's another Drupal one. Anyway, I do like Drupal. Anyway, the important thing, like, do some due diligence on on the framework that you're using. Just have a look underneath that surface and see ultimately what PHP it's actually using when it rolls up into the framework. Just be aware of what's in there. Again, we build these applications to protect end users. As we need to protect their data, we need to protect their experience, and also your infrastructure. Which brings me to my next point. I'm not going to delve into the infrastructure side of things too much, but as we all know, and that Laravel Vapor was actually haven't used it yet. I'm going to go have a play with it after this. But like, our infrastructure is just as critical now with our applications, and again, protecting those end users. So Docker, for example, and I've got a couple of examples I want to pick through tonight. We've seen over, well, everyone's using containerization now, right? But Nathan at the start talking about the stats with JetBrains, I'm kind of not surprised given we've seen over 242 billion downloads of Docker images to date. I mean, from a development point of view, it's great. Docker's great, or containerization in general is great, because I can deploy my application or build my application locally in my own containerized environment, and then deploy using that same or a very similar containerization into infrastructure that scales out as I need it to, which is kind of cool because, I mean, no more monoliths, right? No more monoliths. No, they have a place. I know they have a place. Maybe that's another talk. If anyone wants to come give a talk on that, please. Anyway, but it's no surprise, and this makes up the next part of our iceberg. It's no surprise that we're seeing the same type of vulnerabilities appear in our containers now too, which, and based on what I was just talking about, and we're going to take a look at a demo of it in a sec, is like those same containers are built using the same components that we see with the same vulnerabilities appearing in them. So one of the more prominent ones in the recent years was the image magic hack. So basically I can upload, and again, sanitize input. I can upload a vulnerable image that can inject into, using the image magic vulnerability, into infrastructure, containerized infrastructure, which then I can get control of as a malicious actor or as a malicious attacker. So, and again, we got to thinking of that holistic iceberg stack. The point here is to try and protect our end users that we really care about. No, we do, because they're who we're building these applications for. Now, I like to think of this, and this is totally another dev joke. Yeah, with great containerization comes great responsibility. Hey. In particular, and I've got the Drupal one here, but we're going to look at the PHP. I grabbed the Docker Hub PHP image or container, which has had over, that one, the Drupal one's had over 100 million downloads, but we're going to look at the PHP one, which has had over 500 million downloads. But consistently, these top, we see year on year, is the top 10 Docker base images basically carry the same vulnerabilities that we see in open source libraries and in code. Ideally, with containerization in particular, the best way to make sure everything's nice and secure is to start with the most base possible image and add the components in. Only add the components in that you need. So don't carry extra things in there. I mean, you're going to save runtime, you're going to save space, but also you're just going to save those vulnerabilities being surfaced. What is going on with my clicking? There we go. The last part about Iceberg, and I'm a big fan of automation, is infrastructure as code, or IAC as we all know it. So using stuff like AWS CloudFormation, code pipelines, and of course, Amazon S3. I'm not going to get into permissions on the S3 side of things. There is some great talks on that, and we're all a lot more aware of them these days, I'd like to think. But the thing I love most about, in particular with automation, is from a developer point of view, CI/CD stuff, like deploying so easy, so quick. Everything always passes those tests like first go, right? Looking at you, Jenkins. But as a dev, like I can deploy stuff super quick and be able to define the environment that my application is going to run in within the parameters of whatever operations set as an overarching like base target. The thing to keep in mind with those configuration files, though, particularly with YAML, is misconfiguration is just as critical as the code itself, because often that's where we'll also see infrastructure being exploited. So I'm totally not going to go into that a whole lot today, although we are going to look at a couple things. Anyway, let's do some demo things. So I'm going to switch over. Oh, there's a chat thing. I don't know if I can get to it. Anyway, I'm going to switch over to my demo app. Oh, first time it's literally like, you know, when you get that electronics thing and you peel the plastic off the top? Yeah, it's like that. So satisfying. Anyway, especially when it works, it's going to work. Anyway, so I've got a basic to-do app here, and I've literally only got one library loaded in at the moment. So that's how new it is. See, plastic, fresh plastic smell. Anyway, I'm using the common mark, which is a markdown. That's the one there. Common mark by league, which is a markdown library, essentially. So I can take, as part of the to-do app, I can take some input in and then be able to do markdown things. Something similar to, this is, oh wait, let's do, this is bold. See if this works. No, it won't. Okay. I'll just do a test. I should have gone with the one that I tested. There we go. Hey, I'm going to take that one out. We're using a markdown library. In particular, I'm using 0.18.2, as you can see on the screen. Anything below 0.18.3 is like not good, and you should use it. Essentially, there's a cross-site scripting attack inside this library, which is what I'm going to test here essentially now. So the way that works, and again, this is input sanitization, is as part of the initial setup of the library, is it's got some basic flags that you can set, or some variables you can set. Now, I was looking at this one, I was like, so one of them is allow unsafe links, which is false. It's like, why wouldn't that just be on? Literally inside the library, there's some customization that you can do, so you can actually allow particular link types as well. In fact, the vulnerability injection that I'm going to be doing in a sec literally has a JavaScript injection that takes place as part of this. But normally what these sanitization flags do is try and strip out any sort of character types that we wouldn't want to see. Well, we just wouldn't want to either see inside the app, stored inside the database, and this is using MySQL or MariaDB. It tries to strip out any combination of character types so that nothing like that, ever touches, hence the sanitization part side of things. Anyway, this is a markdown library, so we can add links, which is essentially how, just like that. So I should make that import box bigger. Anyway, just do a markdown link, which is what that is. So you can see there, like that worked as expected because it's a safe link, it's a safe URL. And if I hover over that, I can see it's going to take me to BrisPHP website. One of the common attack methods is to try and inject JavaScript into the application using a cross-site scripting attack, with the idea that particularly if it's an app where that same imported data is going to be surfaced to the user inside their browser, that then becomes a major vulnerability because you can do all sorts of nasty things inside that, particularly if it doesn't get sanitized out. So essentially most attackers or most attacks will try and inject JavaScript with malicious intents. So if I do that one there, you can see there's no link, like it gets stripped out. So it identifies that one. The other common way to try and get around that is to URL encode character sets. So same thing again, I've just got input with some URL encoding in there, which won't work because it's able to identify and strip that out. So the particular vulnerability though essentially adds in some extra words to try and get around, again, trying to get around that sanitization, trying to get around that regex. Oh yeah, I need to make that box bigger. Anyway, note to self, to do. I've just added it to the to do. Oh, I feel like there was an accidental joke there. Anyway, what this one does is inject some different combination character types or word types by adding in colon as a word, as a URL encoded word, or HTML encoded. That's what I meant. HTML encoded word, so that again we try and get around that particular regex input, which is where the vulnerability actually happens in this one. And there's a full write-up on this too, which you can pick through. But if I click that link now, it's actually going to open an alert box. And I mean, relatively harmless as far as demos go, but you can imagine how many different ways that can be used to do all sorts of nasty things. But yeah, the alert box now says, gotcha, which is true, it did. And that's the vulnerability type inside that particular package. As you can see, like the latest version is version 2, I did see this, 2.02.20, yeah, which is, I mean, doesn't have this vulnerability carried in anymore. I did test it. So anyway, I'm going to have this on my GitHub soon if anyone wants to have a play with that. Just quickly before I switch back to the Prezo and wrap up, but one thing I did do, so I've been scanning and going to the containerization side of things. I've been scanning the Drupal. So this is the Drupal Docker Hub image that I had before, 100 million downloads. As you can see, like there's a whole bunch of vulnerabilities that's being detected in that Docker base image. And this is literally from the Docker library Drupal repo. Like this is just, I just hooked up the two. We can get our free tier to read straight from any repo that you want. So there's a few things that I've been keeping an eye on. I raise security tickets back on the groups whenever we can. But the thing you can see here is like there's vulnerabilities, known vulnerabilities being carried in through all these different deployment options straight from the Docker Hub image. And indeed on the official PHP image, 500 million downloads. And I scanned this one earlier, depending on what operating system or operating environment you're running this particular Docker image on, like there's a bunch of bad stuff hiding in them. Some of them are okay. Oh, that's a release candidate. Yeah, okay, never mind. Oh, that one's all right. Alpine 3.14 FPM, PHP 8. That's also PHP 8. Those aren't too bad. But again, like going back to what I was saying about doing your due diligence and understanding like what is hiding inside some of the stuff you're deploying, this is the first step, like making sure, well, third step when you're thinking of the holistic iceberg view. This is part of that iceberg view where you just make sure you know what you're deploying your nice clean app onto, and knowing, again, keeping those users safe, knowing what's in your infrastructure. So anyway, I'm going to switch back to the Prezo because almost out of time. And there was one important thing that I wanted to mention before I go. Is get ready for the scary bit, because we missed something in our holistic iceberg view. Yes, we did. The development environment. You might be thinking, oh no, leave my development environment alone, please. I really like it a whole lot. And I do too, but sorry to tell you, but this probably comes as no surprise given, I mean, we install so much stuff now from the open source ecosystem. All those times that I just brew install a particular thing and hey presto, I can see, you know, crypto prices now on my taskbar or whatever it is. Particularly setting up development environments now, like we're seeing the same vulnerabilities carrying into local environments. So again, do the due diligence, but also on your local environment, know what you're installing. So in particular, we released some research a few months back, and there's been a few more since. Actually, Brew themselves, for those that are using Homebrew, Brew themselves had a security vulnerability alert go out in April, talking about some dependencies that had been injected into some of the core repos. And again, like always subscribe to this stuff if you can, just to be aware of, well, what's out. and I'm going to talk about why this is extra scary in a moment, but the 4 VS Code plugins that we did some research around, or released some security research around recently, were Latex Workshop, Open in Default Browser, Instant Markdown, and I swear this last one's real. I have used it before, but there's the Rainbow Fart. I forget what it does, but anyway, these extensions basically used open source libraries to bring functionality inside VS Code and essentially opened up to the same vulnerable types that we see surface in applications. So the scariest one of these, I actually have I have a demo of it on my GitHub, and it's something I've been demoing lately as well. But Instant Markdown runs a localized web server to be able to do live markdown. So actually, that's the GIF running inside the slide. I just realized, and I put the GIF there. No, it literally runs a localized server, so you can see your real-time edits on a markdown file in a browser. How this can be used is through what's known as a file traversal. You can actually access files on the person's Mac remotely. An attacker can access files remotely. So the demo that I've been doing, I actually do a capture the flag on the user from the user's home directory. Actually, one of the funniest, scariest, probably a mix of both, live streams when we initially sort of reported on this was my one-up manager, Lyra, was on a live stream demoing that same one. And the security researcher doing the remote attack basically lifted his Mac password file using this vulnerability. So if you do try this at home, please don't leave it installed. Just don't. Please don't. Yeah, like the GitHub link is on that slide, or I can make it available after if anyone wants it. But please don't leave it installed. Please. Yeah, and they've got write-ups in this on our blog as well. Anyway, I'm basically out of time, but please always be scanning. Again, do that due diligence. Take the time to understand what you're running inside your stack, what's hiding inside that iceberg, and same to be said for your dev environment as well. Just know what you've got hiding around there, because yeah, protect those end users. Also protect your local environment. Very important. If anyone, we've got a free conference coming up. If anyone wants to learn more security stuff, actually Troy Hunt, I'm sure everyone knows who that is. Troy Hunt's going to be doing a presentation at SneakCon in October. Free tickets, region friendly, which is always great. No 2 a.m. starts. Also, I was hoping it was going to be out by now, but it's in closed beta at the moment. But we do have PHP scanning coming to SneakCode like any day now. No, it'll probably be in about a week and a half now before it gets opened up to public. Essentially, we have this machine learning engine which can take an entire language set and then work out based on known vulnerability types, the combinations of language which is able to, which can cause those vulnerabilities. So to give you an idea, I already know the numbers that it spat out. I've kind of done some playing with it. Cross-site scripting attack, which is #1 identified for PHP, is about 84,000 combinations. Second, insecure hashing. I mean, no surprise. I actually thought that one would be first. 42,000 possible combos. So this is all free tier stuff. So if you want to play with it when it comes out, yeah, it's there. Anyway, that's kind of me. Just remember to please use your tech superpowers for good. I know you all do. I just love this gift. And remember to be excellent to each other. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Developer Steve. I cannot believe that you had your name changed for that. That is so good.
I did. I've lost my Zoom. Wait, there we go. Hey, there we go. Well, I was partially interested to see if I could do it. They actually rang me too and were like, you sure? I'm like, yeah, let's do it.
You didn't just like accidentally copy and paste your job title into one of the fields?
No. Well, everyone was calling me. Like, I turn up to a conference, or even now, I just turn up online and people go, "Hey, Developer Steve." It's like, hey.
Sticks, may as well run with it.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Any questions?
The real question I have is, why did you only do your middle name? Why didn't you do your first name?
Oh, see, I debated this one, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to have to go through like non-tech communities from time to time. The shops, or get pulled over by the police. And I thought, if I have Stephen Kuchard, then I can just, kind of be normal. But it is on my license now. So New South Wales, we were in Melbourne last year. New South Wales prints your full middle name, so it is on my New South Wales driver's license and passport too. So what can go wrong?
People are going to think you just like hacked the system, just like
Which in the Matrix.
needed like a little trophy to demonstrate that you hacked it.
Anyway. I read the rules before, like I did it. You can't use like captain or doctor or as a first name. I wonder if you can use it as a middle name. No, I'm not changing
Maybe,
it again.
yeah.
It was.
There you go. Well, thanks for that. That was it was really good. I also love the I want to say bad jokes. They're bad jokes. They're good jokes. But they're also bad.
They entice face palms. It's normal.
Exactly.
But yeah, it keeps everyone smiling.
Exactly.
Actually, one time I haven't done this one for a while, but shout out to Ben Beckeray, who's done so many PHP conferences as well over the time. But when he was running Open Source Developer Conference, I came up with it was 2014. I came up with a whole new one for him that I used many times. But if you get a bottle of when you're around dev friends, you grab a bottle of sauce and go, look, open source, and just unscrew the lid. Anyway.
Low hanging fruit, but someone's got to take it. Yeah. Well, thank you for your talk tonight, and thank you as well to our sponsors, Credit Sense, Maro Post, Look at Me Go. I'm remembering from earlier on, Info Exchange, and Procure Pro. It's obviously the combination of all our sponsors that makes even a remote podcast almost meetup. There's still a fair bit behind the scenes that has to go on to organize this. Thanks to everyone who put through the pizza survey, because literally all of you won, so great job. We had exactly 11 entrants, including the 11th entrant being Mick Mac. You won the JetBrains voucher, so congratulations. Look forward to seeing everyone soon, and fingers crossed the Q4 can be in person and with real beer.
I was so looking forward to doing an in-person one this time, and then it was literally like a week after we decided to do it, then we ended up in lockdown with restrictions. So disappointing.
It's how it be sometimes. It's how it be.
Yeah. Anyway, thanks for coming, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a wonderful evening.